In the heart of Millbrook, a town where everyone knew everyone else's business, Elena Martinez walked with her head down, her worn sneakers making soft sounds against the cracked sidewalk. Her oversized sweater hung loose around her small frame, hiding scars both visible and invisible from a childhood that had taught her to make herself small, to stay quiet, to never expect too much from life. The residents of Millbrook saw her as the shy librarian's assistant who restocked books after hours, the girl who'd never quite recovered from losing her parents in that terrible accident when she was 16. What they didn't know was that behind her quiet demeanor lived a woman whose heart held enough love to heal the deepest wounds, and whose gentle wisdom had been forged in the fires of unimaginable loss. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of Millbrook Public Library, casting golden rectangles across the worn wooden floors where Elena had spent the better part of 5 years arranging and rearranging books with methodical precision. Her supervisor, Mrs. Henderson, had long since stopped checking on her work, trusting Elena's quiet competence to keep their small corner of the world organized. Elena preferred it this way, the solitude giving her space to breathe without the weight of pitying glances or whispered conversations about the poor Martinez girl who never quite bounced back. At 26, Elena had settled into a routine that felt safe if not fulfilling. She lived alone in a tiny apartment above Henderson's bakery, where the morning smell of fresh bread mingled with the faint scent of vanilla from the candles she burned to chase away the loneliness. Her days began before dawn with yoga on her small balcony, a practice she discovered in a self-help book that promised inner peace but delivered only temporary quiet to her restless mind. She walked to work through empty streets, unlocked the library before anyone else arrived, and spent her mornings in the children's section, where bright picture books reminded her of simpler times before tragedy rewrote her story. The children's section had become her sanctuary within a sanctuary. Elena had transformed it from a neglected corner into a magical space with reading, nooks shaped like tree houses and walls painted with murals of fairy tale scenes. She'd paid for most of the improvements herself, working weekends at the local flower shop to earn extra money. Mrs. Henderson had initially protested the changes, worried about the cost and the disruption, but even she couldn't argue with the results when families began traveling from neighboring towns just to experience the wonder Elena had created. Elena's apartment reflected the same careful attention to creating beauty from broken things. She collected damaged books from library sales, repairing torn pages with tissue-thin paper, and rebinding split spines with colorful thread. Her small living space was filled with rescued furniture she'd restored, plants she'd nursed back to health from the flower shop's discard pile, and photographs of sunrises she captured during her morning walks. Each item told a story of something discarded being given new purpose, though Elena never made the connection between her surroundings and her own life. The loneliness had become such a constant companion that Elena barely noticed it anymore. Like background music playing so long you forget it's there. She filled her evenings with online courses in library science, art history, and child psychology, driven by a hunger for knowledge that had nothing to do with career advancement and everything to do with understanding how broken things could be made whole again. She'd completed enough coursework to qualify for advanced positions in larger cities, but the thought of leaving Millbrook, of starting over somewhere new where she'd have to explain herself all over again, felt overwhelming. Her social interactions were limited but meaningful in their own small way. There was Mrs. Chun at the flower shop, who always saved the prettiest blooms that were just past their prime for Elena to take home. There was Tommy Rodriguez, an 8-year-old who came to the library every Tuesday after school and had slowly opened up to Elena about his parents' divorce through conversations about characters in the books they read together. There was Father Miguel at St. Catherine's, who'd known Elena's parents and still lit candles for them every year on the anniversary of the accident, though Elena hadn't attended Mass since the funeral. Elena's relationship with her own reflection had become complicated over the years. She saw her mother's dark eyes and gentle smile looking back at her, along with her father's stubborn chin and expressive eyebrows. But she also saw the weight of survival guilt, the way grief had carved subtle lines around her eyes and taught her to curve her shoulders inward as if protecting her heart from further damage. She'd been beautiful once, back in high school, when Jacob Martinez would pick her up for school every morning, and Rosa Martinez would braid flowers into her long black hair. Now she kept her hair in a simple ponytail, wore minimal makeup, and chose clothes that helped her blend into the background. The accident had happened on a rainy Tuesday evening in November. Elena had been at the library studying for her SATs, determined to earn the scholarship that would take her to college and make her parents proud. They'd been driving to pick her up when a drunk driver ran a red light at the intersection of Main and Elm. The call came while Elena was researching essay topics about overcoming adversity, the irony of which still made her stomach turn 8 years later. In a single moment, her future had transformed from limitless possibility to endless questions about what could have been. The aftermath had been a blur of funeral arrangements, insurance claims, and well-meaning relatives who couldn't understand why Elena didn't want to move away from Millbrook to start fresh somewhere else. She'd aged a decade in those first few months, learning to navigate adult responsibilities while still processing the magnitude of her loss. The scholarship had come through, but Elena couldn't bring herself to leave the town where her parents were buried, where their memory lived in every familiar street corner and friendly face. Her Aunt Carmen had visited from Phoenix every few months during that first year, bringing casseroles and concern in equal measure. She'd begged Elena to come live with her family, to finish high school in Arizona and attend college there. Elena had always politely declined, though she could never fully explain her need to stay rooted in the place where her grief made the most sense. Carmen's visits had become less frequent over the years, replaced by monthly phone calls filled with gentle updates about her cousins, achievements, and carefully worded suggestions that perhaps it was time for Elena to consider moving forward. Moving forward had become the phrase that followed Elena everywhere, whispered by well-meaning neighbors and concerned church ladies who couldn't understand why she hadn't remarried or at least started dating someone nice. They saw her quiet life as a problem to be solved rather than a choice to be respected. Elena had tried dating briefly in her early 20s, accepting setup attempts from Mrs. Henderson and awkward coffee dates arranged by the librarian, Mrs. Patterson. But explaining her story to strangers felt like reopening wounds that had barely begun to heal, and she'd eventually stopped accepting invitations altogether. The truth was that Elena had moved forward, just not in the ways that other people could easily recognize. She'd learned to find joy in small things like the surprise of discovering a handwritten note in a returned library book or the satisfaction of helping Tommy sound out a difficult word. She'd developed an intuitive understanding of what children needed when they were struggling, earned through her own experience of being adrift and misunderstood. She'd become an expert at reading the subtle signs of pain in others, though she remained blind to her own healing journey. Elena's mornings often began with dreams of her parents, not the painful nightmares that had plagued her first years of grief, but gentle conversations where they offered advice or simply sat together in comfortable silence. She'd wake with tears on her cheeks but peace in her heart, carrying their imagined words with her throughout the day. These dreams had taught her that love doesn't end with death, but transforms into something more subtle and enduring, a lesson she carried into every interaction with the children who sought refuge in her library corner. The children seemed to sense something special about Elena, gravitating toward her with the instinctive trust that young hearts extend to safe adults. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, Subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Parents often commented on how their shy children bloomed under Elena's patient attention. How their reluctant readers discovered a love of stories in her cozy reading nooks. Elena never sought credit for these small transformations, deflecting praise with gentle smiles and redirecting conversations toward the children's own growth and discoveries. Her reputation as someone with a special gift for connecting with struggling children had spread quietly through Millbrook's network of parents and teachers. When children were going through difficult transitions like divorce or moving or the loss of a pet, parents would quietly arrange library visits, knowing that Elena would somehow understand exactly what their child needed without being told the details. She never asked probing questions or offered unsolicited advice, instead creating space for children to share what they were ready to share and feel heard without judgment. Elena's personal library at home had evolved into a carefully curated collection of books about resilience, healing, and finding meaning after loss. She'd read everything from ancient philosophy to modern psychology, not seeking easy answers but building a framework for understanding how humans navigate suffering and emerge changed but not destroyed. These books had become her teachers in the absence of formal mentors, their wisdom synthesized into the gentle approach she took with everyone who crossed her path. The flower shop work had taught Elena practical skills about nurturing living things back to health, lessons she applied metaphorically to her interactions with people. She understood that some wounds needed time and space to heal, that rushing the process often caused more damage, and that sometimes the most beautiful blooms emerged from plants that had weathered the harshest conditions. Mrs. Chun had noticed Elena's natural talent for coaxing life back into struggling plants and had begun trusting her with the shop's most challenging rescue cases. Elena's financial situation was modest but stable, her simple lifestyle requiring fewer resources than most people her age. She'd inherited her parents' small life insurance policies and had invested the money conservatively, more concerned with security than growth. The house where she'd grown up had been sold to pay for the funeral and final expenses, but Elena had kept her parents' bedroom furniture and a few precious family photos that she displayed carefully in her apartment. She'd learned to live lightly, finding richness in experiences rather than possessions. Her artistic talents had emerged gradually during the long, quiet evenings of her early 20s. What had started as simple sketching to fill empty hours had evolved into detailed drawings and eventually small paintings that captured the subtle beauty she noticed in everyday moments. Elena never showed these works to anyone else, considering them private conversations with herself rather than art meant for public consumption. Her apartment walls were covered with her own paintings of Millbrook's changing seasons, each piece documenting her slow journey from surviving to quietly thriving. The thought of romantic love felt both impossibly distant and dangerously tempting to Elena. She'd convinced herself that she'd used up her lifetime allocation of deep connection with her parents, that asking for more would be greedy somehow. When she watched couples walking hand in hand down Main Street or saw families laughing together at the town's summer festivals, she felt a hollow ache that she'd learned to breathe through and release. She'd become an expert at being happy for others while protecting herself from hoping for too much. Elena's daily routine had become a carefully choreographed dance with solitude, each activity chosen to provide comfort without requiring vulnerability. She shopped early in the morning when stores were nearly empty, chose the same walking routes that minimized unexpected social encounters, and had developed polite but brief responses to the friendly inquiries of neighbors who genuinely cared about her well-being. She'd become fluent in the art of appearing fine while keeping the deeper parts of herself safely hidden from potential judgment or pity. The approaching summer had brought whispers of changes coming to Millbrook, rumors of new businesses opening, and young families moving to town for the lower cost of living and small-town charm. Elena found herself both curious about these changes and anxious. about how they might disrupt the predictable rhythms of her carefully constructed life. Change had once brought devastating loss, and though she'd grown stronger and more resilient, the prospect of major shifts in her familiar world still triggered old protective instincts. Her morning walks had become longer recently, extending beyond the downtown area into the residential neighborhoods where new construction was beginning to appear. Elena found herself drawn to these signs of growth and renewal, even as part of her worried about losing the intimate scale of the community, where everyone knew her story and treated her with gentle familiarity. She was caught between a longing for something new and different and a fear of losing the safety she'd worked so hard to build. The library had become Elena's kingdom in miniature, a place where she wielded quiet influence and made daily decisions that affected people's lives in small but meaningful ways. She'd memorized the reading preferences of regular patrons, anticipated the needs of students working on research projects, and created displays that introduced readers to authors and subjects they might never have discovered otherwise. Her suggestions carried weight with people who'd learned to trust her judgment about books that would comfort, challenge, or inspire them. Standing in the morning light that painted everything golden, Elena had no way of knowing that her carefully constructed world was about to be transformed by someone who would see her hidden depths as treasures rather than burdens. Someone was coming who would look at her quiet strength and recognize it as the very quality he'd been searching for without knowing it. Someone who would teach her that being broken and being whole weren't opposite states, but different aspects of the same beautiful, complicated human experience. The morning that would change everything started like any other, with Elena arriving at the library 30 minutes before opening time to water the plants and straighten the children's section. She was adjusting a display of books about friendship when she heard the unmistakable sound of a motorcycle pulling into the parking lot, its engine rumbling with the deep, throaty growl of a machine built for power rather than efficiency. Millbrook rarely saw motorcycles, especially not at 7:30 on a Wednesday morning, and Elena found herself moving toward the window with curiosity that surprised her. The man who dismounted from the sleek black Harley looked nothing like the leather-clad rebels she'd imagined when she heard the engine. Tall and lean with dark hair that showed premature silver at the temples, he moved with the careful precision of someone who'd learned to navigate the world despite significant challenges. It wasn't until he turned toward the library entrance that Elena saw the white cane folded in his left hand and understood why his movements seemed so deliberately measured. He was wearing dark sunglasses despite the early hour, and his clothing was simple but expensive, the kind of understated quality that spoke of success without ostentation. Elena stepped back from the window, her heart racing with an unexpected mixture of curiosity and anxiety. Blind patrons visited the library regularly for audiobooks and large print materials, but something about this stranger felt different, charged with an energy that seemed to electrify the quiet morning air. She busied herself with unnecessary tasks, trying to calm her nerves while listening for the sound of the front door opening. When he entered the library 15 minutes later, Elena was behind the circulation desk pretending to catalog returned books. She heard his footsteps pause just inside the entrance, and when she looked up, she found herself captured by the intensity of his presence, even though his eyes were hidden behind dark lenses. He stood perfectly still for a long moment, his head tilted slightly as if listening to something she couldn't hear, and Elena realized he was mapping the space through sound and perhaps smell, creating a mental picture of the library's layout. "Good morning," she said softly, not wanting to startle him. "I'm Elena. Can I help you find something?" His smile transformed his entire face, revealing warmth that his serious expression had concealed. "Good morning, Elena. I'm David Chun. I just moved to town yesterday, and I was hoping to get a library card and maybe learn a bit about Millbrook's history. I have a feeling this is going to be my home for a while." Elena felt something shift inside her chest, a flutter of recognition. That had nothing to do with having met him before, and everything to do with sensing a kindred spirit. His voice carried traces of pain expertly woven into strength, the same combination she heard in her own reflection during her most honest moments. There was something about the way he said home that suggested he'd been searching for it as long as she'd been hiding from the possibility of change. "Of course," she replied, moving around the desk to approach him slowly, instinctively understanding that sudden movements might be disorienting. "The local history section is wonderful. We have photographs dating back to the town's founding in 1887, and several families have donated oral history recordings." "What brings you to Millbrook?" David's expression grew thoughtful as he considered her question. "I'm a music therapist. I was offered a position at the Children's Hospital in Cedar Falls, about 30 minutes from here. I wanted to live somewhere quieter than the city, but close enough to make the commute reasonable." The real estate agent said Millbrook had a strong sense of community and beautiful old architecture. She didn't mention it also has the most welcoming librarian in the state. Elena felt heat rise in her cheeks at the compliment, unused to such direct appreciation from strangers. She'd grown accustomed to being invisible, valued for her efficiency rather than her personality, and David's warm attention felt both wonderful and slightly overwhelming. "Mrs. Patterson is our head librarian," she corrected gently. "I'm just the assistant, but I'd be happy to show you around and help you get oriented." "Just the assistant," David repeated, his tone suggesting he heard something in those words that Elena hadn't intended to reveal. "Something tells me you're being modest. The way you speak about the collection, the care in your voice when you describe the history resources, that's not the attitude of someone who's just anything." Elena felt exposed by his observation, as if his inability to see her physically had somehow enhanced his ability to perceive her more clearly than most sighted people did. She led him through the library, describing the layout and resources in detail, hyper-aware of how her voice sounded and whether she was walking too fast for him to comfortably follow. His questions revealed both intelligence and genuine interest in the community he was joining, and Elena found herself sharing stories about Millbrook that she'd never told anyone else. They paused in the children's section, where David's attention was immediately captured by the reading nooks and colorful murals Elena had created. His hand traced the carved edge of a reading bench shaped like a crescent moon, and his smile returned as he absorbed the creative detail she'd poured into the space. "This is incredible," he said, his voice filled with genuine admiration. "The acoustics in this corner are perfect for storytelling, and I can feel how much thought went into making every element child-friendly. Whoever designed this understands exactly what children need to feel safe and inspired." "I helped with some of the decorating," Elena admitted, her natural tendency toward modesty warring with unexpected pride in his appreciation of her work. "It's not much, but the children seem to enjoy it." "Not much?" David turned toward her, his expression incredulous. "Elena, this is extraordinary. The spatial relationships, the way the furniture creates natural conversation areas while still allowing children to find private spaces when they need them, the integration of different textures and heights to accommodate various developmental stages. This is the work of someone who truly understands child development and environmental psychology." Elena stared at him in amazement, hearing her own instinctive design choices described with professional terminology she'd never learned, but somehow understood. "How do you know all that?" "My graduate work included courses in therapeutic environment design. I've seen million-dollar children's hospitals that aren't as thoughtfully arranged as this corner of your library." David's expression grew curious. "What's your background in child development?" "I don't have one," Elena replied honestly. "I just pay attention to what seems to work. Children tell you what they need if you watch and listen closely enough." David was quiet for a long moment, processing her words. "That's the most sophisticated understanding of child psychology I've heard in years, and you just described it as paying attention." "Elena, I think you're significantly more gifted than you realize." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Mrs. Patterson, the head librarian, whose expression brightened when she saw David's white cane. Mrs. Patterson had been advocating for years to improve the library's accessibility services, and she immediately launched into an enthusiastic description of their audiobook collection and assistive technology resources. Elena watched David's face as he listened politely to information he probably already knew, responding with patience and gratitude that suggested he was accustomed to well-meaning but unnecessary assistance. During a pause in Mrs. Patterson's monologue, David smoothly redirected the conversation. "Elena has been incredibly helpful in showing me around. She's given me such detailed descriptions that I feel like I could navigate the entire library independently after just one visit. You're fortunate to have someone with her observational skills and communication abilities on your staff." Mrs. Patterson beamed with pride, as if she'd personally trained Elena in these abilities, though Elena knew her supervisor had little understanding of the intuitive approach she took with patrons. "Elena is wonderful with the children's programs. She has such a natural way with them." "I can see that," David replied, though his choice of words made Elena wonder if he'd noticed the irony. "The children's section feels like it was designed by someone who remembers exactly what it felt like to be young and need a safe place to explore the world through books." Elena felt her throat tighten with unexpected emotion at his description. He'd somehow identified the driving force behind all her work without knowing anything about her history. The children's section had been her way of creating the haven she'd needed after her parents died, the safe space where scared and lonely children could find comfort and possibility. Mrs. Patterson returned to her office after completing David's registration process, leaving Elena to help him select his first batch of audiobooks. She found herself drawn into conversation about his work as a music therapist, fascinated by his descriptions of using sound and rhythm to help children process trauma and develop communication skills. "Music reaches places that words can't touch," David explained as they browsed the audiobook collection, "especially with children who've experienced loss or upheaval. Sometimes a melody can express what they're feeling when they don't have the vocabulary or emotional maturity to articulate it verbally." Elena felt a jolt of recognition at his words. "That's how I felt about books when I was younger. Stories gave me language for experiences I couldn't otherwise understand." "When you were younger?" David's tone was gently curious. "What changed?" Elena realized she'd revealed more than she'd intended, opening a door to her personal history that she usually kept firmly closed. "I guess I just grew out of needing that kind of escape," she said carefully, hoping he wouldn't press for details. David was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "I've found that people don't usually grow out of needing art and stories. Sometimes they convince themselves they don't deserve the comfort anymore, or they're afraid of feeling too much, but the need doesn't disappear." His words hit Elena with uncomfortable accuracy, forcing her to confront truths she'd been avoiding. She'd told herself she preferred nonfiction because it was more practical, but David's observation made her realize she'd been protecting herself from the emotional vulnerability that came with engaging deeply with stories. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Tommy Rodriguez, the 8-year-old who visited every Tuesday after school. He burst through the library doors with his usual enthusiasm, calling out a greeting to Elena before noticing David, and stopping short with the sudden shyness that overcame him around strangers. "Hi, Tommy," Elena said warmly. "Come meet Mr. Chun. He's new to town, and he's a music therapist who works with children." Tommy approached cautiously, his curiosity overcoming his reserve as he processed what Elena had told him. "Do you play instruments?" he asked David directly. "Several," David replied, his voice taking on a gentleness that Elena noted was specifically calibrated for child interaction. "Guitar, piano, violin, and some percussion instruments. Do you like music?" Tommy's face lit up. "I play clarinet in school band, but I'm not very good yet. The other kids are way better than me." "How long have you been playing?" David asked. "Since September." "That's only like 6 months." "Tommy," David said seriously, "I've been playing music for 25 years, and I'm still learning new things every single day. 6 months is just the very beginning of your musical journey. The other kids aren't better than you. They've just been traveling the path a little longer." Elena watched Tommy's posture straighten as he absorbed David's words, seeing confidence return to the boy's expression. She'd witnessed this transformation many times when Tommy found books that resonated with his interests, but David had accomplished the same result through a single conversation. "Would you like to hear something?" David asked. Without waiting for a response, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a small wooden flute. So beautifully crafted, it looked like a work of art. He played a simple melody, just a few notes, that somehow contained entire worlds of possibility and wonder. Tommy was transfixed, and Elena found herself equally captivated by the unexpected music filling the library's quiet spaces. The melody was both joyful and wistful, complex in its simplicity, and Elena understood instinctively that David had improvised it in response to Tommy's specific emotional needs in that moment. "That was beautiful," Tommy whispered when the last note faded. "Could you teach me to play something like that?" "Music like that comes from inside you," David replied, carefully returning the flute to his jacket. "My job would just be to help you find the melodies you already carry and learn the techniques to share them with others." Elena felt tears prick her eyes at David's response, recognizing the same philosophy she'd unconsciously applied to her work with children. She'd always believed that children possessed innate wisdom and creativity that adults needed to nurture rather than impose upon, but she'd never heard anyone articulate it with such clarity and confidence. Tommy spent the next hour showing David around the children's section, chattering about his favorite books and explaining the various reading nooks with the pride of ownership. Elena observed their interaction from a distance, noting how naturally David engaged with Tommy's energy while providing the kind of steady, patient attention the boy craved. When Tommy finally left for home, promising to ask his mother about music lessons, David turned back to Elena with an expression of deep appreciation. "Thank you for including me in that. It's been a long time since I've had such a natural conversation with a child." "Tommy's special," Elena replied. "He's been coming here for months working through his parents' divorce. Books have been his refuge, but I could see how much he needed what you offered him today." David's expression grew serious. "You saw that he needed music?" Most adults would have focused on his academic needs or his behavior. "You recognized his emotional requirements." Elena shrugged, uncomfortable with his continued praise. "It wasn't that complicated. He's been sad and angry for months, and today was the first time I've seen him look genuinely hopeful about anything." "Elena," David said quietly, "what you just described is advanced child psychology. You identified emotional needs, recognized the impact of family trauma, and understood that creative expression might provide therapeutic benefits. That's graduate-level insight presented as common sense." Elena felt overwhelmed by his assessment, unused to having her intuitive abilities described in such professional terms. "I just care about him," she said simply. "Caring isn't simple when it's informed by wisdom," David replied. "And wisdom isn't common when it's combined with genuine compassion." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of several high school students working on a group project about local history. Elena helped them locate resources while David browsed the general fiction section, running his fingers along book spines with practiced efficiency. She found herself stealing glances at him as she worked, fascinated by the way he navigated the physical space and made selections based on publishers, series information, and what she assumed were braille labels he'd added to books he'd read. Before, when the students left, Elena returned to find David holding a worn copy of a poetry collection, his fingers tracing the cover with unusual attention. "Find something interesting?" she asked. David smiled, but there was something melancholy in his expression. Pablo Neruda. This was my wife's favorite poet. She used to read his work aloud to me in the evenings. Elena felt her chest tighten with recognition of grief in his voice. "Was?" she asked gently. "She died 3 years ago," David replied simply. "Cancer. We'd been married for 8 years, together for 12. She was a teacher, brilliant and beautiful, and endlessly patient with my stubborn streak." Elena felt tears threatening again, this time in response to the love and loss so clearly evident in David's voice. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, the words feeling inadequate but necessary. "Thank you," David said, his voice steady despite the emotion behind it. "It's part of why I moved here, actually. I needed a fresh start somewhere without memories around." Every corner. Elena understood completely, though she'd made the opposite choice, staying in Millbrook because leaving felt like abandoning her parents' memory. "Is it helping, the fresh start?" David considered her question seriously. "Today is the first day since moving here that I felt genuinely hopeful about building a new life. Meeting you, seeing your work with Tommy, experiencing the warmth of this community through your eyes, it's shown me possibilities I hadn't imagined." Elena felt something profound shift between them, a recognition of shared experience and mutual understanding that went beyond their brief acquaintance. They both lost people they loved deeply. Both struggled to rebuild meaning and purpose in the aftermath of devastating loss. Both found ways to channel their pain into service to others. The rest of the afternoon passed in comfortable conversation. As Elena helped David explore different sections of the library and learn about community resources, she found herself sharing more about Millbrook's history and character than she'd intended, surprised by how easily words flowed when she was talking to someone who listened with such focused attention. When closing time approached, David gathered his selections and prepared to leave, but he hesitated at the circulation desk as if wanting to extend their conversation. "Elena," he said finally, "I know this might be presumptuous since we just met, but would you be interested in having coffee? Sometime, I'd love to learn more about the town from someone who clearly loves it as much as you do." Elena felt her automatic defenses rising, the familiar urge to deflect and retreat that had protected her from vulnerability for so many years. But looking at David's hopeful expression, remembering the gentleness he'd shown Tommy and the wisdom he'd shared about grief and healing, she found herself nodding before her fears could override her longing for connection. "I'd like that," she said, surprising herself with the steadiness of her voice. "There's a cafe downtown that serves excellent coffee and has tables outside where we could sit." David's smile was radiant. "Perfect. Tomorrow evening, around 6? "Tomorrow evening," Elena agreed, feeling as if she'd just stepped off a cliff and discovered she could fly. As David's motorcycle rumbled to life in the parking lot, Elena stood at the library window, watching him navigate the familiar streets of her small world with the confidence of someone who'd already begun making it his home. She pressed her hand to her chest, feeling her heart beat with a rhythm that seemed different somehow, more alive and hopeful than it had been in years. For the first time since she'd lost her parents, Elena allowed herself to imagine that her story might include chapters she hadn't yet written, connections she hadn't yet dared to hope for, and possibilities that extended far beyond the safe boundaries she'd constructed around her wounded heart. Their coffee date the following evening transformed into 3 hours of conversation that flowed with the natural ease of old friends reconnecting after years apart. Elena found herself sharing stories about Millbrook's hidden treasures while David described his work with children who'd experienced trauma, and their separate experiences began weaving together into a tapestry of mutual understanding. When David walked her home afterward, navigating the darkened streets with Elena's soft-spoken directions and the confident stride of someone already claiming belonging in a new place, she realized she hadn't felt this genuinely happy in longer than she could remember. Word traveled fast in a town the size of Millbrook. And by Thursday morning, Elena noticed curious glances from patrons who'd spotted her with David at the cafe. Mrs. Henderson from the bakery mentioned seeing them together with the kind of meaningful smile that suggested romantic possibilities, while Mrs. Patterson peppered Elena with questions about their new patron's background and intentions. Elena deflected most inquiries with gentle redirection, but she couldn't hide the lightness in her step or the way her face brightened whenever David's name entered conversation. David's integration into Millbrook's social fabric happened with surprising speed, aided by his natural ability to connect with people and his genuine interest in contributing to community life. Within a week of their first meeting, he'd volunteered to provide music therapy sessions for the Children's Hospital Auxiliary, offered to help with the upcoming summer reading program, and somehow convinced Father Miguel to let him play guitar during the contemporary service at St. Catherine's. Elena watched his effortless networking with a mixture of admiration and bewilderment, having forgotten what it looked like when someone embraced new possibilities instead of retreating from them. The transformation in Tommy Rodriguez became the talk of the elementary school faculty when he auditioned for the spring talent show with a clarinet performance that showcased not just improved technique, but genuine confidence and joy in performing. His teacher, Mrs. Williams, sought out Elena at the library to ask what had changed, and Elena found herself explaining David's gift for helping children discover their own musical voices. Word of David's impact spread through the network of parents and teachers, and soon Elena was fielding requests for information about music therapy services and recommendations for children struggling with various challenges. Elena's role as informal liaison between David and the community pushed her into social interactions she'd been avoiding for years. Parents approached her at the grocery store to ask about David's qualifications and availability, and she discovered she could speak passionately and knowledgeably about his work, despite having no formal training in music therapy herself. These conversations revealed depths of insight she developed through years of observing children's emotional needs, and she began to understand what David had recognized in her from their first meeting. The Spring Festival Planning Committee recruited Elena to coordinate with David about providing musical entertainment, a responsibility that required attending evening meetings at the community center. Elena hadn't participated in town committees since high school, but she found herself drawn back into civic involvement through her connection with David's work. The committee members were delighted to rediscover Elena's organizational skills and creative vision, talents that had been hidden behind years of quiet routine, but emerged naturally when she felt her contributions were valued. David's influence began extending beyond individual interactions when Dr. Elena Martinez from the Children's Hospital visited Millbrook to meet with him about expanding their therapeutic programs. Elena found herself included in their lunch meeting, ostensibly to provide local perspective, but increasingly as someone whose insights about child development were sought and respected. Dr. Martinez was impressed by Elena's intuitive understanding of trauma responses in children and suggested she consider formal training in child psychology or art therapy. The suggestion planted seeds in Elena's mind that continued growing throughout the following weeks. She began researching degree programs in her spare time, astonished to discover how closely her self-directed learning aligned with established therapeutic approaches. The online courses she'd taken in child psychology suddenly seemed less like hobby interests and more like the foundation for a potential career change that could combine her natural gifts with professional credentials. Elena's apartment gradually reflected her expanding world as David became a regular visitor, sharing meals and conversation that stretched late into evening hours. She found herself preparing food for two, choosing wine that complemented their discussions about books and music, and rearranging furniture to accommodate their growing collection of shared experiences. The space that had once felt like a refuge from the world began transforming into a launching pad for new adventures. Their relationship deepened through small gestures and significant revelations shared in equal measure. David introduced Elena to music she'd never explored, playing guitar compositions that captured emotions she couldn't express in words. Elena shared her paintings with him, describing the colors and textures while he traced the canvases with sensitive fingers that seemed to perceive beauty through touch in ways that amazed her. They discovered compatibility in their approaches to healing, their shared experiences of loss, and their mutual commitment to helping others navigate difficult transitions. The children's section of the library became an informal testing ground for collaborative programming, as Elena and David experimented with combining storytelling and music therapy techniques. Their Wednesday afternoon sessions drew families from surrounding towns, and Elena found herself co-facilitating activities that addressed emotional regulation, creative expression, and social connection through integrated arts approaches. The success of these programs caught the attention of the regional library system, which began inquiring about replicating their model in other locations. Elena's confidence grew through David's consistent encouragement and the tangible evidence of their collaborative success. She began speaking up in community meetings, offering ideas for improving services to families with children, and advocating for resources that would support struggling kids throughout the region. Her voice carried new authority as someone who combined practical experience with developing professional knowledge, and longtime community members began seeing her as a leader rather than just a helper. The transformation wasn't without challenges, as Elena struggled to integrate her expanding sense of possibility with years of learned caution. She experienced anxiety attacks when contemplating major life changes, moments of doubt about whether she deserved the happiness she was experiencing, and fear that embracing new opportunities might somehow dishonor her parents' memory. David's patient presence during these difficult moments provided the steady support she needed to work through old patterns of thinking. Their first serious conflict emerged when Elena's Aunt Carmen visited unexpectedly from Phoenix, bringing with her years of concern about Elena's isolated lifestyle and strong opinions about the changes she witnessed. Carmen's protective instincts clashed with her relief at seeing Elena genuinely happy, creating tension that forced Elena to articulate her choices and defend her right to determine her own path forward. The confrontation revealed Elena's growing strength and David's respectful approach to family dynamics he didn't fully understand. David's presence in Elena's life began attracting attention from beyond Millbrook as word of their innovative programming spread through professional networks. A journalist from the regional newspaper requested an interview about their collaborative approach to community mental health services, and Elena found herself being photographed and quoted alongside David as an equal partner in their therapeutic work. The article described her as an emerging expert in child-centered programming, a designation that felt both thrilling and terrifying. The success of their summer reading program, which incorporated music therapy principles into traditional literacy activities, earned recognition from the State Library Association and an invitation to present their methods at the annual conference. Elena's initial panic at the prospect of public speaking gave way to excitement as she realized she had valuable knowledge to share with other professionals. David's unwavering confidence in her abilities helped her recognize that her years of intuitive practice had prepared her for exactly this kind of opportunity. Elena's relationship with her own past began shifting as she developed language for experiences that had previously felt too overwhelming to examine. Through conversations with David about trauma and healing, she began understanding her parents' death as a formative experience that had shaped her empathy and insight rather than simply as a source of ongoing pain. This reframing allowed her to honor her grief while embracing the wisdom it had taught her about resilience and compassion. The Children's Hospital offered Elena a part-time position developing their bibliotherapy program, recognizing her unique combination of literary knowledge and therapeutic instincts. The opportunity represented validation of abilities she'd never imagined could become professional credentials, and acceptance would mean stepping fully into a career that aligned with her deepest values and natural talents. The decision required Elena to confront her fear of leaving the safety of Millbrook and embrace uncertainty in service of growth. David's support throughout Elena's career transition included practical assistance with interview preparation and emotional encouragement during moments of self-doubt, but he carefully avoided pressuring her toward any particular choice. His respect for her autonomy and trust in her wisdom helped Elena develop confidence in her own decision-making abilities, skills that had been dormant during her years of protective isolation but were essential for navigating her expanding opportunities. The autumn brought speaking engagements that took Elena beyond Millbrook's familiar boundaries, introducing her to colleagues and communities throughout the region. She discovered a talent for presenting complex ideas in accessible language and a gift for inspiring others to recognize therapeutic potential in everyday interactions with children. These experiences revealed professional possibilities she'd never imagined while building her reputation as an innovative thinker in child development programming. Elena's transformation became visible to longtime Millbrook residents who remembered the withdrawn teenager who'd stayed in town after her parents' death. They witnessed her evolution from quiet librarian's assistant to confident professional advocating for children's mental health services, and many credited David's influence for bringing out qualities they'd always sensed but never seen expressed. The community took pride in Elena's achievements while recognizing David's role in helping her discover her own potential. The relationship between Elena and David deepened beyond romance into true partnership as they discovered their complementary strengths and shared vision for using creative arts to support healing and growth. Their personal connection provided the foundation for professional collaboration that was attracting regional and eventually national attention from experts in therapeutic programming. Together, they were creating something neither could have achieved alone, a synthesis of their individual gifts that multiplied their collective impact. Elena's growing professional reputation brought opportunities to consult with schools and community organizations throughout the state, work that required travel and public engagement she'd never imagined herself capable of managing. Each successful project built her confidence, while expanding her understanding of how widely applicable her insights about children's emotional needs truly were. She began seeing herself as someone whose expertise was sought and valued rather than someone who simply helped others accomplish their goals. The prospect of co-authoring a book about integrative approaches to child therapy emerged from their conference presentations and community programming success. Publishers expressed interest in documenting their methods and philosophy, recognizing the potential for widespread application of techniques they'd developed through practical experience rather than academic theory. The writing process would require Elena to articulate knowledge she'd always expressed through action, a challenge that excited and intimidated her in equal measure. Winter brought reflection on the remarkable changes that had occurred since David's arrival in Millbrook, transformations that extended far beyond Elena's individual growth to encompass community programming, professional recognition, and collaborative possibilities that continued expanding. Elena's life had evolved from careful routine to dynamic engagement with opportunities she'd never imagined, supported by a partnership that honored both her strengths and her continued healing journey. The annual Christmas festival provided a showcase for Elena and David's collaborative programming as they organized intergenerational activities that combined storytelling, music, and art therapy techniques for community healing and connection. Families who participated in their library sessions throughout the year performed together, demonstrating the confidence and skills they'd developed through consistent encouragement and creative expression opportunities. The event illustrated how individual therapeutic work could contribute to broader community well-being. Elena's relationship with her own worthiness underwent profound revision as she experienced consistent appreciation for contributions she'd previously dismissed as insignificant. David's recognition of her abilities, combined with tangible evidence of her positive impact on children and families, challenged years of internalized messages about her limitations and helped her develop a more accurate assessment of her gifts and potential for continued growth. Standing at the threshold of a new year that promised continued expansion of her professional opportunities and personal fulfillment, Elena marveled at the distance she'd traveled from the woman who'd hidden behind routine and self-protection. Just months earlier, the transformation hadn't eliminated her capacity for feeling broken or vulnerable, but it had taught her that these aspects of her experience could coexist with strength, wisdom, and the ability to help others heal their own wounded places. The acceptance letter from the Graduate School of Social Work arrived on a Tuesday morning in February, delivered to Elena's apartment with official seals and language that made her hands shake as she read the words that would transform her from intuitive helper to credentialed professional. David found her sitting at her kitchen table, tears streaming down her face as she held the letter that offered her a pathway to formalize the wisdom she'd been developing through years of quiet practice. The full scholarship, awarded based on her innovative community programming and demonstrated expertise in child-centered therapeutic approaches, represented validation she'd never dared to imagine. Elena's decision to pursue graduate education while maintaining her work in Millbrook required careful orchestration of schedules and priorities, but the hybrid program structure allowed her to attend classes online while completing fieldwork requirements through her expanding local practice. David's encouragement proved invaluable as she navigated academic expectations that often lagged behind her practical experience, and she discovered that her years of self-directed learning had prepared her surprisingly well for formal theoretical study. Her professors quickly recognized her unique perspective, often asking her to share case studies and approaches that enriched classroom discussions for students who lacked her extensive hands-on experience. The mentorship role evolved naturally as Elena began supervising undergraduate students completing internship requirements at the library and children's hospital. Her ability to guide emerging professionals while respecting their individual learning styles reflected the patient wisdom she'd developed through years of working with children facing various challenges. Students consistently rated her supervision highly, noting her gift for helping them discover their own strengths rather than imposing predetermined methods or approaches. Elena found deep satisfaction in watching young professionals develop confidence and competence under her guidance. Tommy Rodriguez, now 13 and in middle school, had become Elena's unofficial ambassador among local families, spreading word about her therapeutic approach through his own transformation from anxious, withdrawn child to confident young musician. His mother, Maria, often brought friends to Elena's programming sessions, and Tommy himself began volunteering as a peer mentor for younger children struggling with family difficulties. Elena watched with pride as Tommy demonstrated the emotional regulation skills and empathy he'd developed through their years of library conversations and David's music therapy guidance. The expansion of Elena's influence extended through formal training opportunities she began offering to teachers, librarians, and community workers throughout the region. Her workshops on recognizing trauma responses in children and creating healing environments through arts integration drew participants who traveled significant distances to learn from someone whose reputation for practical wisdom had spread through professional networks. Elena discovered she possessed natural teaching abilities, presenting complex psychological concepts in accessible language, while creating safe spaces for participants to examine their own approaches and assumptions. David's proposal came during a quiet evening in late spring, presented not with theatrical gestures, but with the same thoughtful consideration that characterized all their significant conversations. He spoke about their partnership in terms that honored both her individual journey and their collaborative future, acknowledging that marriage would deepen rather than complete their connection to each other. Elena's acceptance came from a place of wholeness rather than need, a conscious choice to build a life with someone who'd helped her discover her own completeness while contributing his own strength to their shared vision. The wedding planning process revealed Elena's evolved relationship with community as longtime Millbrook residents celebrated her happiness with genuine warmth and appreciation for the woman she'd become. Mrs. Henderson offered to cater the reception. Mrs. Patterson volunteered to coordinate decorations, and Father Miguel eagerly agreed to perform the ceremony in the garden behind the library, where Elena had created so much beauty and healing. The celebration reflected the interconnected relationships Elena had built through years of quiet service and David's more recent, but equally meaningful contributions to community life. Elena's role as David's professional partner deepened through their collaborative work on the book project, which had evolved into a comprehensive guide for implementing therapeutic arts programming in community settings. Their writing sessions revealed the complementary nature of their thinking, with David providing theoretical framework while Elena contributed practical strategies developed through extensive trial and refinement. Publishers expressed enthusiasm for their unique perspective, recognizing the potential market for approaches that bridges academic theory with grassroots implementation. The summer brought their first major conference presentation as co-keynote speakers, an opportunity that required Elena to address an audience of over 500 professionals from across the country. Her nervousness gave way to excitement as she realized she had valuable expertise to share, and her natural storytelling abilities translated effectively to formal presentation format. The standing ovation and subsequent requests for consultation work confirmed that her insights resonated far beyond Millbrook's boundaries, opening doors to influence she'd never imagined possible. Elena's graduate thesis research focused on the long-term outcomes of children who'd participated in her integrated programming, documenting measurable improvements in emotional regulation, academic performance, and social connection among participants. Compared to control groups, the rigorous data collection required her to develop research skills that complemented her intuitive understanding, and the positive results provided empirical support for approaches she developed through observation and experimentation. Her advisor encouraged her to submit findings to peer-reviewed journals, marking her transition from practitioner to scholar practitioner. The establishment of the Martinez Institute for Community Healing represented the culmination of Elena's professional evolution, creating a formal structure for training others in their integrated therapeutic approach. Located in a renovated building donated by a longtime Millbrook family, the Institute combined classroom spaces with demonstration areas where students could observe and practice techniques with real families. Elena served as executive director, a role that required administrative skills she'd developed through years of library programming, but had never imagined applying to her own organization. Elena's teaching methodology emphasized experiential learning over theoretical instruction, requiring students to engage with their own emotional histories and healing journeys as preparation for helping others navigate similar challenges. She created exercises that helped emerging therapists identify their personal strengths and triggers, understanding that self-awareness was essential for ethical and effective practice. Her approach attracted students who were drawn to authentic, relationship-centered therapeutic work rather than more clinical or detached professional models. The integration of Elena's artistic abilities into her professional practice emerged through her development of art therapy techniques specifically designed for children who'd experienced various forms of loss. Her paintings began serving as therapeutic tools, visual representations of healing journeys that helped young clients identify and express emotions they couldn't verbalize. David's musical contributions complemented her visual approaches, creating multi-sensory experiences that address different learning styles and emotional processing needs. Elena's relationship with her own continued growth remains central to her effectiveness as a mentor and teacher, as she modeled the lifelong learning and emotional development she encouraged in others. Her willingness to acknowledge her ongoing challenges with anxiety and grief helped students understand that healing wasn't a destination but a continuous process of integration and adaptation. She shared her own therapy experiences openly, demonstrating that seeking support was a sign of wisdom rather than weakness for helping professionals. The annual Summer Institute became Elena's primary vehicle for training practitioners from around the country, offering intensive week-long experiences that combined theoretical learning with practical application and personal development. Participants consistently reported that Elena's program differed significantly from traditional academic training, focusing on relationship-building skills and emotional intelligence alongside technical competencies. Many returned for advanced training, creating a growing network of professionals implementing her approaches in their own communities. Elena's supervision of doctoral students completing research projects expanded her influence into academic circles where her practical wisdom informed theoretical development and empirical investigation. She served on dissertation committees for students studying community-based intervention approaches, trauma-informed programming, and arts integration in therapeutic settings. Her ability to bridge research and practice made her a sought-after collaborator for academics seeking to ground their theoretical work in real-world applications. The recognition of Elena's contributions to the field came through professional awards and speaking invitations that took her to national conferences and international symposiums. She found herself serving on editorial boards for scholarly journals and consulting with government agencies developing policies for children's mental health services. These opportunities required her to articulate her philosophy and methods for diverse audiences, a process that deepened her own understanding of the principles underlying her work. Elena's marriage to David created a partnership that strengthened both their individual contributions and their collaborative impact, as they discovered that their different strengths created synergy that multiplied their effectiveness. Their personal relationship provided the emotional foundation that allowed them to take professional risks and support each other through challenging periods of growth and expansion. They'd learned to navigate the complex dynamics of being romantic partners, professional collaborators, and individual practitioners, maintaining their own spheres of influence. The development of Elena's leadership skills occurred through necessity as her organization grew and required more sophisticated management approaches, but she discovered that her years of library work had prepared her surprisingly well for administrative responsibilities. Her attention to detail, ability to anticipate needs, and talent for creating systems that supported both efficiency and personal connection translated effectively to running a training institute. She learned to delegate effectively while maintaining the quality standards that had built her reputation. Elena's approach to challenging students or supervisees reflected the same gentle firmness she'd always used with children, creating safe spaces for difficult conversations while maintaining clear expectations for professional development and ethical behavior. Her ability to provide corrective feedback without damaging self-esteem helped emerging practitioners learn from mistakes while building confidence in their developing abilities. Students often commented that Elena's criticism felt supportive, rather than discouraging, helping them improve without undermining their motivation. The expansion of Elena's theoretical contributions to the field emerged through her writing and research, as she began articulating frameworks that could help other practitioners understand and implement relationship-centered therapeutic approaches. Her concepts of parallel healing and wisdom-based intervention gained recognition in academic circles, providing language for practices that had previously relied on intuitive understanding rather than systematic description. She discovered that her ability to observe patterns and connections served her well in theoretical development. Elena's continued work with individual children and families remained central to her identity despite her expanding professional responsibilities, as she insisted on maintaining direct service connections that informed her teaching and kept her grounded in practical realities. Her weekly sessions at the library continued, now enhanced by graduate student observers who learned from watching her natural interactions with children facing various challenges. She often told her students that staying connected to direct practice was essential for maintaining authenticity and relevance in their professional development. The evolution of Elena's understanding of her own gifts continued through reflection on her journey, from isolated librarian's assistant to recognized expert in therapeutic community programming, a transformation that had occurred through the recognition and nurturing of abilities she possessed but never valued. Her story became a central element in her teaching, illustrating for students how professional identity could develop from personal experience when guided by authentic calling and supported by meaningful relationships. She'd learned that her broken places weren't obstacles to overcome, but sources of wisdom that qualified her to help others navigate their own healing journeys. 5 years after their wedding, Elena stood before a mirror in the guest bedroom of their home, adjusting the necklace David had given her for their anniversary while preparing for the most important presentation of her career. The International Conference on Trauma-Informed Community Practice had invited her to deliver the closing keynote address, a recognition that still felt surreal despite her growing reputation in the field. Her reflection showed a woman transformed, not just in confidence but in the fundamental way she inhabited her own skin, comfortable with visibility after decades of seeking shadows. The speech Elena had prepared focused on the concept that had become central to her work, the idea that human brokenness wasn't something to be fixed or hidden but rather the very foundation for authentic connection and healing. She'd titled her presentation, "Perfect Imperfection: How Our Wounded Places Become Our Greatest Gifts," drawing from years of witnessing transformation in herself and countless others who'd learned to see their struggles as sources of wisdom rather than shame. David's morning routine had evolved to include playing gentle melodies on his guitar while Elena prepared for important events, his music serving as both encouragement and grounding for the nervous energy that still accompanied her public speaking engagements. This morning he chose pieces that reminded her of their early conversations in the library, melodies that captured hope emerging from sorrow and strength developing through vulnerability. His presence had become the steady heartbeat that allowed her bold steps into an expanded world. The drive to the conference venue took them through Millbrook's familiar streets, past the library where their story had begun and the community center, where they'd first collaborated on programming that would eventually reach thousands of families. Across the country, Elena felt the weight of responsibility that came with representing not just her own work, but the philosophy of healing that had emerged from their shared journey. She carried the voices of every child, parent, and professional who'd trusted her with their stories of transformation. Backstage at the convention center, Elena encountered Dr. Rebecca Walsh, the keynote speaker from the previous day whose research on resilience factors in children had influenced Elena's own theoretical development. Dr. Walsh approached with genuine warmth, expressing admiration for Elena's community-based approach and sharing how her methods had been implemented in programs across 3 continents. The conversation reminded Elena of how far her influence had traveled from the quiet children's section of a small-town library. The introduction Elena received from the conference organizers highlighted achievements that sounded almost fictional. When recited in sequence, the Martinez Chin Institute had trained over 2,000 practitioners. Their book had been translated into 12 languages, and their intervention model had been adopted by educational systems in 15 states. The numbers represented individual lives touched and communities transformed. But Elena knew the real measure of their work lay in stories like Tommy Rodriguez, now a college sophomore studying music therapy, and Maria Santos, a former supervisee, who'd established similar programming in her native Guatemala. Elena's opening words acknowledged the audience of professionals who dedicated their careers to helping others heal, recognizing the courage required to work in fields that demanded constant engagement with human suffering and hope in equal measure. She spoke about the paradox of therapeutic work, how those drawn to helping others often carried their own histories of pain that both qualified and complicated their service. The auditorium fell silent as she created space for the vulnerability that united everyone in the room. The heart of Elena's message emerged from her own story, shared now with the perspective of someone who'd traveled the full journey from victim to survivor, to thriver to guide for others walking similar paths. She described the young woman who'd believed her parents' death had disqualified her from happiness, who'd spent years making herself invisible because she couldn't imagine deserving to be seen. The audience recognized themselves in her description of believing that brokenness was something to overcome rather than integrate. Elena's voice strengthened as she moved into the theoretical framework she'd developed through years of practice and reflection, explaining how traditional models of healing often aim to return clients to some imagined state of wholeness that had never actually existed. She proposed instead an approach that honored woundedness as the birthplace of empathy, compassion, and wisdom, qualities that enabled authentic connection with others navigating their own struggles. Her words challenged the fundamental assumptions that had shaped many professionals' training and practice. The audience leaned forward as Elena described practical applications of her philosophy, sharing case studies that illustrated how acknowledging rather than minimizing pain could accelerate healing and growth. She told the story of a teenager whose cutting behavior had been transformed into therapeutic art creation, a mother whose postpartum depression had been reframed as evidence of her deep capacity for love, and a veteran whose combat trauma had qualified him to mentor other military families facing similar challenges. David's presence in the front row provided Elena with an anchor of love and support as she moved into the most personal portion of her presentation, describing how her relationship with him had taught her that healthy partnerships weren't formed by two complete people finding each other, but by two broken people choosing to heal together. She spoke about how David's visual impairment hadn't been something she'd overlooked or adapted to, but rather one of the qualities that had drawn her to him because it represented his own experience of navigating the world differently. Elena's description of their collaborative work illustrated how professional partnerships could model the kind of mutual support and complementary strengths that characterized healthy relationships at every level. She explained how David's theoretical knowledge had provided framework for her intuitive insights, while her practical experience had grounded his academic understanding in real-world application. Their success had emerged from their differences rather than despite them. The question and answer session following Elena's formal presentation revealed the hunger among practitioners for approaches that honored the full spectrum of human experience, rather than pathologizing struggle or promising unrealistic outcomes. Audience members shared their own stories of how personal challenges had shaped their professional calling, creating a dialogue that extended far beyond the scheduled time. As people lingered to continue conversations that felt essential to their work and lives, Elena's final words to the conference emphasized the revolutionary nature of accepting brokenness as beautiful, suggesting that this shift in perspective could transform not just individual therapeutic relationships, but entire communities' approaches to supporting members facing various challenges. She challenged the audience to examine their own wounded places with curiosity rather than judgment, recognizing these areas as the source of their qualification to help others rather than evidence of their inadequacy. The standing ovation Elena received felt different from previous recognition, carrying the weight of professionals who'd been given permission to embrace their own imperfections as assets rather than liabilities. The applause seemed to acknowledge Not just her presentation, but the courage required to stand before peers and claim brokenness as a badge of honor, rather than a secret to be hidden. Back home in Millbrook that evening, Elena and David sat on their porch watching the sunset paint their small town in shades of gold and rose, reflecting on how the place that had once felt like a refuge from the world had become their launching pad for influence and healing approaches across the globe. Their house was filled with letters from professionals who'd implemented their methods, artwork from children whose lives had been touched by their programming, and photographs from training events where they'd witnessed other people's transformation. Elena's gratitude encompassed not just her professional achievements, but the personal journey that had brought her to a place where she could receive love without feeling unworthy and offer guidance without doubting her qualifications. She'd learned that healing wasn't about becoming invulnerable, but about developing the capacity to remain open despite having been hurt, to trust despite having been disappointed, and to love despite having lost. The conversation turned to their plans for the coming years, including the International Fellowship Program they were developing to bring practitioners from around the world to Millbrook for intensive training experiences. Elena laughed at the irony of their small town becoming a destination for people seeking to learn about community healing. But she understood that the intimate scale of Millbrook was precisely what allowed their work to flourish. David's evening guitar playing took on special significance that night as he improvised melodies that captured the day's triumph, while honoring the journey that had made it possible. Elena listened with tears of joy streaming down her face, recognizing in his music the same theme that had become central to their shared philosophy. That beauty emerged not despite brokenness, but because of it, not in spite of imperfection, but through the authentic expression of wholeness that included rather than denied struggle. Their work together had proven that the most profound healing occurred when people stopped trying to fix themselves and started learning to love themselves exactly as they were, wounds and all. Elena's story had become a testament to the power of being seen and accepted completely, of finding someone who looked at every broken place and declared it perfect for their own needs for connection and growth. As they prepared for bed, Elena reflected on how the scared young woman hiding in the library had become someone capable of standing before international audiences and sharing wisdom that could transform communities. The journey hadn't required her to become someone different, but to become more fully herself, embracing every aspect of her experience as valuable rather than shameful. The final entry in Elena's journal that night captured the essence of what she'd learned through her transformation from isolation to connection, from self-doubt to confidence, from believing she was too damaged for love to understanding that her capacity for healing others emerged directly from her own experience of being healed. She wrote about the miracle of finding someone who'd looked at her history of loss and seen not disqualification but preparation, not brokenness but beautiful complexity. Elena's last conscious thought before sleep was gratitude for David's words. From their early courtship, when she'd protested that she was too broken for someone as good as him, and he'd replied with the phrase that had become their shared truth, "You're not too anything. You're perfect for my broken places." In learning to believe those words, she discovered not just love but her life's calling, her voice, and her power to help others find their own perfect imperfections. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.